The morning sun barely touched the horizon when Elara Vance's alarm vibrated against her pillow. Not rang, vibrated. The 17-year-old had learned to rely on sensations rather than sounds. Ever since progressive hearing loss had stolen most of her high-frequency hearing 3 years ago, she silenced the alarm and sat up in bed, already reaching for the behind-the-ear hearing aids on her nightstand. The world clicked into a fuzzy focus. Not silence exactly, but a muffled, underwater version of reality where consonants disappeared and high-pitched sounds simply didn't exist. Elara had mastered the art of reading lips, watching body language, and filling in the gaps of conversations she only half heard. But lately, even her expensive hearing aids struggled to keep up with her deteriorating condition. She dressed quickly in worn jeans and boots, catching her reflection in the mirror. Dark circles under hazel eyes, auburn hair pulled back in a perpetual ponytail, and the telltale plastic curve of her hearing aids visible despite her attempts to hide them. At school, she'd become the girl who asked "what?" too many times, who missed the punchlines of jokes, who slowly withdrew from the social chaos of teenage life. But here at Windsor Oak Ranch, 400 acres of Colorado grassland that her father, Arthur Vance, had poured his life into, Elara found purpose in work that didn't require perfect hearing. Cattle didn't judge her for asking them to repeat themselves. Fence posts didn't get annoyed when she missed their subtle sounds. The land accepted her exactly as she was. "Elara, breakfast!" Her mother, Genevieve's voice barely penetrated the walls, but Elara had learned to read the rhythm of the house. She could feel the vibrations of her mother moving around the kitchen below. Downstairs, her father sat at the kitchen table with his coffee, looking more tired than usual. Arthur Vance was 52, but looked older, worn down by the endless struggle of keeping a mid-sized ranch profitable in an era of corporate agriculture. His weathered hands wrapped around his mug, and Elara didn't need perfect hearing to read the tension in his shoulders. "Morning, Dad," she said, her own voice sounding strange in her head. She could never quite tell if she was speaking too loud or too soft anymore. Arthur looked up and smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He signed as he spoke, a habit the whole family had adopted. "Morning, sweetheart. Sleep okay?" Elara had insisted they all learn ASL when her diagnosis became clear. It was a backup plan, a lifeline for the day when hearing aids might not be enough. Her younger brother Lucas had taken to it enthusiastically, but Arthur still fumbled with the more complex signs. "Fine," she replied, pouring herself orange juice. "What's wrong?" Genevieve sat down a plate of eggs with a sigh. "Your father got a call an hour ago. Apparently there's been some kind of mix-up with a horse delivery." "What do you mean, a mix-up?" Elara asked, settling into her chair. Arthur rubbed his face. "You know that gelding I bought from the auction last month? The bay quarter horse that was supposed to arrive next week for Lucas to learn on? Yeah. Well, apparently the transport company made an error. They delivered a completely different horse here 3 days ago while we were at the livestock show in Denver." Elara blinked. 3 days ago? How is that possible? Who's been taking care of it? "Old Jedediah from next door saw the trailer and just turned the horse out in our south pasture. Figured we'd hired someone to deliver while we were gone. The transport driver apparently had our address, but the wrong paperwork. Jedediah just called an hour ago, mentioning he'd seen that fancy jumper we'd gotten." "A jumper?" Elara's interest sparked. "We didn't buy a jumper." "Exactly." Arthur pulled out his phone and showed her an email. "The horse is registered as the Duke's Command. Belongs to some high-end show-jumping facility in Connecticut. According to this panicked email I just got, she's worth about $150,000 and was supposed to be delivered to a training barn in Boulder, not a cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere." The number hit Elara like a physical blow. $150,000. That was more than their entire annual ranch income. And she's been here for 3 days, just loose in our pasture? Jedediah said he put her in the south pasture with good grass and water, so she should be fine. But the facility is sending someone to pick her up this afternoon. They're furious, threatening to sue the transport company. Arthur's expression darkened. They also mentioned the horse is difficult and potentially dangerous. Said we should stay away from her until they arrive. Something in those words, difficult, dangerous, made Elara's spine straighten. She'd heard those words before, had them whispered behind her back at school. Difficult to work with, doesn't follow instructions, disruptive in class, all because she sometimes missed verbal cues or needed instructions repeated. I'm going to check on her, Elara said, standing up. Elara? No, Genevieve protested. If she's dangerous... A horse doesn't just become dangerous for no reason, Elara interrupted. And if she's been alone in our pasture for 3 days, someone should at least make sure she's okay. They said noon, right? That gives me 4 hours. Arthur studied his daughter for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Take your phone and don't go in the pasture with her. Just observe from the fence. Elara grabbed an apple from the counter and headed out, her heart beating faster than she'd like to admit. A $150,000 show jumper here by mistake. It felt like something out of a movie. The south pasture was a 20-minute walk from the main house through fields where their small herd of cattle grazed peacefully in the morning light. Elara's boots crunched on gravel, then whispered through grass still wet with dew. She breathed in the familiar scent of sage and earth, letting the rhythm of walking calm her nerves. When she crested the hill overlooking the south pasture, she saw her. The Duke stood at the far end of the field, a stunning dark bay mare with a white blaze down her face and 3 white socks. Even from a distance, Elara could see the quality in her build, the powerful hindquarters, the elegant neck, the way she held herself with aristocratic bearing despite being alone in an unfamiliar place. But something was wrong. The mare was pacing along the fence line, not with the relaxed wandering of a content horse, but with rigid, jerky movements. Her head swung from side to side in wide, sweeping arcs. And even from here, Elara could see the whites of her eyes. Fear. The horse was terrified. Elara approached the fence slowly, staying visible, moving in the deliberate way that usually calmed nervous horses. She'd grown up around animals, had learned young that steady, predictable movements spoke louder than words ever could, a lesson that had served her even better after her diagnosis. But as she got closer, the Duke's behavior became more frantic. The mare spun away from the fence, galloped to the other side of the pasture, then spun back, her movements sharp and panicked rather than aggressive. "Hey, girl," Elara called softly, though she had no idea if her volume was right. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The Duke's head snapped toward her, and for a moment they locked eyes across the 50 feet of pasture. The mare's nostrils flared, her body tense as a coiled spring. Then she bolted again, racing along the fence line in what looked like sheer panic. Elara's heart ached watching it. This wasn't aggression. This was terror. But terror of what? Elara was staying calm, moving slowly, keeping her distance. What was spooking the horse so badly? She tried again, this time staying completely still, making herself as small and non-threatening as possible. "Easy, Duke. Easy, girl." The mare skidded to a stop about 30 feet away, her sides heaving. She stared at Elara with wild eyes, head high, every muscle screaming danger. And that's when Elara noticed something odd. When the Duke was looking directly at her, the mare seemed slightly calmer, but the moment Elara moved to the side, even slightly, the panic returned. It was as if the horse needed to see her straight on, needed that direct visual contact. A theory began forming in Elara's mind, one so obvious in hindsight that she wondered why no one had seen it before. She took several deliberate steps to her right, moving along the fence line. The Duke's head tracked her movement, but with a slight delay. and when Elara moved into the mare's peripheral vision, the panic spiked again. Then Elara did something that felt risky but necessary. She stopped moving and clapped her hands together once, twice, 3 times. The Duke didn't react at all. Elara's breath caught in her throat. She clapped again, louder this time, the sound sharp in the morning air. The mare continued grazing nervously, head swinging, but showing no response to the noise that should have at least made her ears flick. "Oh my God," Elara whispered. "You can't hear me?" She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and called her father. "Dad," she said the moment he picked up, probably talking too fast, too loud. "The horse, the Duke. I think she's deaf." There was a pause. "What?" "She's not aggressive or difficult. She's deaf, or mostly deaf at least. Watch." Elara switched to video call and showed her father through the phone's camera as she clapped, whistled, and even shouted. The Duke barely responded to any of it, but she keeps looking around so wildly, Arthur observed through the screen, because she can't hear danger approaching. Elara explained, the pieces falling into place. She's relying entirely on vision, which means she's scared of anything coming from her blind spots. All those behavioral problems they reported, I bet every single one happened because people approached her in ways she couldn't see or gave verbal commands she couldn't hear and then punished her for not responding. Elara's voice was tight with emotion. Arthur was quiet for a long moment. That would explain why they called her difficult. "It's exactly what happened to me in school before I got my diagnosis," Elara said bitterly. "Teachers thought I was ignoring them, being defiant, not paying attention, but I literally couldn't hear what they were saying. I was just trying to survive." "What do you want to do?" Arthur asked carefully. Elara looked at the frightened mare, pacing the fence line, seeing herself reflected in every panicked movement. "I want to try something. Can you give me an hour before those people arrive?" "Elara, even if you're right about her hearing, she's still scared and unpredictable. You could get hurt." "I know what I'm doing, Dad. Trust me." Another long pause, then 1 hour. "But I'm watching from the hill with the binoculars, and if I see anything dangerous, I'm coming down there." "Deal." Elara hung up and turned back to the Duke. The mare had stopped pacing and was watching her wearily, head still high, body still tense. But there was something in those dark eyes beyond fear, a desperate intelligence, a yearning to understand what was happening to her. "Okay, girl," Elara said softly, knowing the mare couldn't hear her, but needing to speak anyway. "Let's start over my way." She remembered her own early days of hearing loss, the isolation and fear when the world suddenly stopped making sense. What had helped her most? Visual communication, consistency, patience, people who didn't get frustrated when she needed things repeated or done differently. Elara grabbed a long stick from near the fence and began drawing a large circle in the dirt just outside the pasture. Then she stepped back and watched. The Duke's ears, which Elara now noticed barely moved at all, pointed forward as the mare watched the drawing process with intense curiosity. Visual information, that's what this horse needed. Elara drew an X in the center of the circle, then stood on it. She raised both hands slowly, deliberately, where the Duke could clearly see them. Then she lowered them, raised them, lowered them, a simple, repetitive visual signal. The mare took one tentative step closer, her gaze locked on Elara's hands. Encouraged, Elara continued the slow, rhythmic hand movements. Up, down, predictable, consistent, non-threatening. She kept her body language soft, her posture relaxed, making herself as readable as possible. After 5 minutes of this, the Duke took another step closer, then another. Elara's heart soared, but she forced herself to remain calm. She knew from experience that trust was built in inches, not miles. She kept the hand signals going, adding a gentle smile, visual warmth to replace the verbal reassurance she couldn't give. 15 minutes passed, then 20. The Duke had crossed half the distance between them, moving in cautious increments, constantly evaluating this strange human who communicated in ways she could actually understand. When the mare was about 10 feet away, Elara very slowly lowered herself into a sitting position on the ground. It was a vulnerable posture, deliberately non-threatening. She kept her hands visible, continuing the slow up and down motion. The Duke's nostrils flared as she processed this new information. A predator would never make itself vulnerable. A threat would never sit down. The mare took 3 more steps and stopped directly in front of Elara, barely 5 feet away. This close, Elara could see everything. The old scars on the Duke's legs from what must have been harsh training methods. The slight cloudiness in her ears that might indicate congenital issues. And most heartbreakingly, the desperate, intelligent awareness in her eyes. This horse knew something was different about her. She knew others got angry when she didn't respond. She knew she was considered broken. Elara knew exactly how that felt. Moving very slowly, Elara pulled the apple from her pocket. She held it flat on her palm, arm extended just slightly, an offering, not a bribe, but a gesture of friendship. The Duke's head lowered cautiously. Her soft nose touched Elara's hand first, testing, evaluating. Then, with heartbreaking gentleness, the mare took the apple, her lips barely grazing Elara's skin. As the Duke chewed, Elara raised her hand slowly and let it rest on the mare's neck. The horse's skin was warm, slightly damp with nervous sweat, and Elara could feel the powerful muscles trembling slightly beneath the surface. "I understand," Elara whispered, knowing the Duke couldn't hear but needing to say it anyway. "I understand exactly what you've been through, and I promise you, here with me, you're not broken. You're just different, like me." They stayed like that for several minutes. Girl and horse, both marked by the same invisible disability that made the world treat them as difficult rather than different. The sound of vehicles approaching made Elara look up. She could feel the vibrations through the ground before she heard the engines. 2 trucks were pulling up near the south pasture, and even from this distance, she could see the professional lettering on the sides. Monarch Show Jumping Academy. Her hour was up. Arthur was walking down the hill toward them, and Elara could see the concern on his face. But when he got close enough to see Elara sitting peacefully with the Duke standing over her protectively, his expression shifted to amazement. 3 people emerged from the trucks, a tall, severe-looking woman in expensive riding clothes, a younger man carrying a lead rope, and an older gentleman with the bearing of someone accustomed to giving orders. The woman, who introduced herself as Diana Sterling, director of Monarch Academy, barely glanced at Arthur before launching into her speech. "Mr. Vance, I apologize for the inconvenience this mix-up has caused. Rest assured, the transport company will be held accountable. We'll load the Duke and be out of your way within the hour." "About that," Arthur started, but Diana cut him off. "We'll compensate you for any feed cost, of course. Now, if you could show us which pasture she's in." "She's right there," Elara called out, standing up slowly. The Duke stood beside her, calm now, her nose nearly touching Elara's shoulder. All 3 visitors stopped dead, staring at the scene before them. "That's impossible," the younger man breathed. "She's a nightmare to handle. It takes 3 people just to halter her." "That's because none of you realize she's deaf," Elara said flatly, her hand resting gently on the Duke's neck. "Deaf?" Diana's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Don't be ridiculous. We've had her evaluated by multiple veterinarians. She's just aggressive and stubborn." "Did any of those veterinarians test her hearing?" Elara challenged. The silence that followed was answer enough. Elara pulled out her phone. "Watch." She played a video she'd recorded earlier, showing herself clapping, whistling, and shouting, with the Duke showing 0 response to any auditory stimulus. Then she played a second video showing the dramatic difference when she used visual signals. The older gentleman, who introduced himself as Robert Thorne, owner of Monarch Academy, studied the videos with a frown. Even if you're correct, it doesn't change the fact that she's been unsuccessful in our program. We can't train a deaf horse for competitive show jumping. The timing, the commands, the communication, it all relies on auditory cues. Only because that's how you've always done it, Elara countered. But horses are visual animals anyway. With the right approach, the right signals, there's no reason she couldn't compete. Diana laughed, a cold sound. You're a child playing with a very expensive animal you don't understand. The Duke has failed at 3 different facilities. She's been deemed untrainable. She's not untrainable, Elara said, her voice rising despite her attempt to stay calm. She hated how she couldn't quite control her volume when emotions ran high. She's been mistreated and misunderstood. There's a huge difference. Elara, Arthur said gently, touching her shoulder. But Robert was studying her intently now, his sharp gaze taking in her hearing aids, the way she watched his lips when he spoke. You have hearing loss yourself, don't you? Elara lifted her chin. Progressive hearing loss. I'll probably be completely deaf by the time I'm 25. I see. Robert exchanged glances with Diana. And you think this gives you special insight into working with the Duke? I know it does. In the last hour, I've made more progress with her than anyone at your fancy academy did in months. And I did it without forcing her, without scaring her, without making her feel like she was broken. The word broken hung in the air, raw with personal meaning that everyone present could feel. Robert pulled Diana aside for a whispered conversation while the younger man, who'd introduced himself as Mark, their head trainer, approached the fence carefully. He watched the Duke, who was now standing relaxed beside Elara, occasionally nudging the girl's pockets in hopes of finding more treats. I'll be damned, Mark muttered. I've never seen her this calm, not once in the 8 months we had her. What usually happened? Arthur asked. Mark grimaced. She'd spook at everything, spin away when we approached, kick out if we pushed her. We thought she was just mean-spirited. But if she really is deaf... He trailed off, clearly rethinking everything he'd experienced. We must have terrified her constantly, Elara added quietly, coming up from blind spots, yelling commands she couldn't hear, getting frustrated when she didn't respond, and then punishing her for it, making her believe she was the problem. Mark had the grace to look ashamed. We were trying to train a champion show jumper. We didn't realize we were traumatizing a disabled horse. Robert Thorne and Diana Sterling returned, their expressions unreadable. Mr. Vance, Robert began, we find ourselves in an unusual situation. The Duke is legally our property, purchased for $150,000 specifically for our breeding and show program. However, she has proven to be a financial liability rather than an asset. What are you saying? Arthur asked cautiously. I'm saying that I'm prepared to offer you a business proposition. We'll sell the Duke to you for $5,000, a fraction of her value, and waive any liability claims related to this delivery mix-up. In exchange, you sign a contract stating that any future injuries or incidents involving this horse are solely your responsibility. Elara's heart leaped, but Arthur's expression darkened. $5,000 is more than we have to spare, Mr. Thorne. We're a working cattle ranch, not a show-jumping facility. And frankly, it sounds like you're trying to dump a problem onto us and get paid for the privilege. Dad, Elara started. No, Elara. I understand you've connected with this horse, but we have to be practical. We can't afford a $5,000 pasture pet, especially one with special needs. She's not a pet, Elara insisted. She could be trained. She could even compete again with the right approach. Sweetheart, that's a lovely dream, but it's not a dream. Elara's voice cracked with frustration and desperation. I've spent 3 years learning to navigate a world that isn't built for people like me. I know exactly what the Duke needs, because I've lived it, and she trusts me already. You saw it yourself. We could do this. Arthur's weathered face softened with pain. Even if that's true, we don't have $5,000 to spare. The ranch is barely breaking even as it is. I'm sorry, Elara. I truly am. Robert observed this exchange with calculating interest. What if we modified the proposition? Instead of an outright purchase, consider this. Keep the Duke here for 6 months as a trial. If your daughter can truly rehabilitate and train her using these visual techniques, we'll document the process. The academic and training value of that information would be substantial, worth far more than the sale price. And if we can't, Arthur asked skeptically, then we'll simply reclaim her at the end of 6 months. No money exchanged. Robert's sharp eyes fixed on Elara. If you succeed, truly succeed, in training her to the point where she could compete, we would want the option to purchase her back at a premium, say $200,000. We'd also want exclusive rights to the training methodology you develop. Diana looked like she wanted to protest, but Robert silenced her with a look. Think about it, Mr. Vance, Robert continued. Your daughter gets to prove her theory. We potentially gain valuable training insights. And if it works, your family receives a substantial payout that could secure your ranch for years. If it doesn't work, you're simply horse-sitting for 6 months. That's not fair, Elara protested. If I train her, if I prove she can compete, she should stay here. She shouldn't go back to people who made her miserable. Robert's expression hardened slightly. Then we have no deal. The horse is legally ours, Miss Vance. This is the only offer that keeps her here at all. Elara looked at the Duke, who was watching the humans with intelligent, trusting eyes. The mare had finally found someone who understood her, who didn't treat her disability as a defect. The thought of her going back to that trailer, back to an environment that had terrorized her, was unbearable. But the alternative, proving she could be trained only to have her taken away, was almost as painful. Elara, Arthur said softly, it's your choice. If you want to try this, I'll support you. But you need to understand what you're agreeing to. Elara swallowed hard. 6 months. It wasn't enough time. Not really. To fully rehabilitate and train a traumatized horse. But it was infinitely better than watching the Duke loaded into that trailer today. Watching trust turn back to terror in those dark eyes. Okay, she said finally, her voice barely audible even to herself. We'll do the 6-month trial. Elara turned back to the Duke and wrapped her arms around the mare's neck. I won't let you down, she whispered, knowing the horse couldn't hear, but hoping she could feel the promise in the embrace. 6 months. We'll make them count. The Duke lowered her head and rested it on Elara's shoulder, a gesture of complete trust that made tears stream down the girl's face. As the Monarch Academy trucks drove away an hour later, leaving only impossible expectations in their wake, Arthur put his arm around his daughter. You know, this is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done, he said gently. I know, and there's no guarantee it'll work. She might be too traumatized, or the training methods might not translate, or... Dad, Elara interrupted, looking up at him with fierce determination. I've spent 3 years being told what I can't do because of my hearing. I've been called difficult, stubborn, unfocused, and disruptive, all because I experience the world differently. I'm not going to let the Duke be defined by her limitations when I know exactly what she's capable of. Arthur studied his daughter's face and saw not the uncertain girl who'd retreated into herself after her diagnosis, but a young woman who'd found her purpose. Okay then, he said, squeezing her shoulder. Let's prove them wrong. The first month was brutal. The Duke's trauma ran deeper than Elara had initially realized. The mare would have good days where she seemed to understand the visual signals Elara was teaching her, where she moved with confidence and grace. But then something would trigger her. A shadow falling unexpectedly. A bird flying too close. The sensation of vulnerability that came from not being able to hear danger approaching, and she'd regress into panic. Elara documented everything in a journal. noting what worked and what didn't, patterns in the Duke's behavior, incremental progress measured in millimeters rather than miles. She developed a system of hand signals for basic commands: stop, go, turn left, turn right. She used colored flags to mark jumping courses, giving the Duke visual waypoints. She learned to move in the Duke's line of sight at all times, never surprising her, always making herself visible and predictable. The local veterinarian, Dr. Elara Vance, no relation, confirmed Elara's suspicions after a thorough examination. The Duke had been born with malformed inner ear structures that left her almost completely deaf. It wasn't a recent injury or illness. She'd lived her entire life this way, struggling in a world built for hearing horses. The miracle, Dr. Vance said, shaking her head in wonder, is that she survived this long in competitive training without seriously injuring herself or someone else. The stress she must have been under is unimaginable. School became a challenge Elara hadn't anticipated. She'd arranged to do online classes for most of her senior year so she could focus on the Duke's training. But that meant isolation, long hours alone with her thoughts and a traumatized horse. Her friends drifted away, unable to understand her obsession. Her younger brother Lucas helped when he could, learning the visual signals and serving as an extra set of hands. But he had his own life, his own teenage concerns. Some days, Elara wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake, if she was sacrificing her senior year, her social life, her own future for a horse that might never heal. But then she'd walk out to the pasture at dawn, and the Duke would see her and come trotting over, nickering softly, a sound the mare could feel in her chest if not hear. And Elara would remember why this mattered. They were both learning to live in a world that wasn't designed for them, and they were learning together. By month 3, the progress was undeniable. The Duke would follow Elara through complex patterns using only visual cues. She'd learned to read body language with extraordinary precision, picking up on subtle shifts in posture that told her what was expected. More importantly, her confidence was growing. The constant panic had eased into cautious optimism, but jumping, the thing the Duke had been bred and trained for, remained elusive. Every time Elara set up even small cross rails, the mare would balk, her body language screaming refusal. Not defiance, but fear. She associates jumping with trauma, Dr. Vance observed during one of her regular check-ins. In her previous training, jumping probably came with harsh corrections she couldn't understand, punishment for failure she didn't know she was making. So, how do I help her love it again? Elara asked desperately. If she can't jump, Robert will never consider her successfully trained. They'll take her back and probably sell her at auction. Maybe, Dr. Vance said carefully, the question isn't how to make her jump. It's whether jumping is what she wants at all. The words hit Elara hard. She'd been so focused on proving the Duke could do what everyone said was impossible that she hadn't stopped to ask if the mare even wanted to. That night, Elara did something she rarely allowed herself. She cried. Not quiet, dignified tears, but ugly, gasping sobs that her family could probably hear throughout the house. She'd worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and it still might not be enough. Her mother, Genevieve, found her in the barn an hour later, sitting in the Duke's stall while the mare stood guard protectively. "Tell me what's wrong," Genevieve signed, settling into the hay beside her daughter. Elara explained through halting words and signs about the jumping problem, about time running out, about feeling like she was failing both herself and the Duke. Genevieve listened quietly, then said something that would change everything. "When you were diagnosed with hearing loss, do you remember what your biggest fear was?" "That I'd never be normal again?" Elara answered immediately. "Exactly. And what's the advice you give now to other kids in your online support group?" Elara paused, seeing where her mother was going. "That normal is overrated. That different doesn't mean less. that we have to define success on our own terms, not society's expectations. "So, why are you trying to force the Duke to be normal?" Genevieve asked gently. "Why does she have to jump to prove her worth?" The next morning, Elara tried something new. Instead of working on jumping, she brought the Duke out to the cattle pasture. She'd noticed how the mare seemed fascinated by the cows, how she'd watched them graze with intense focus. What happened next shocked everyone. The Duke took to cattle work like she'd been bred for it. When Elara used visual signals to indicate which cow to separate from the herd, the mare moved with intelligence and precision that exceeded many trained cutting horses. She anticipated movements, positioned herself perfectly, and seemed to genuinely enjoy the mental challenge. Arthur, watching from the fence, couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Elara, she's incredible at this." Over the next 3 weeks, Elara developed an entirely new training approach. Instead of forcing the Duke back into show jumping, she leaned into what the mare naturally excelled at: cattle work, trail riding, and complex visual problem-solving tasks. She documented every session, every breakthrough, building a portfolio that proved the Duke wasn't just rehabilitated. She was exceptional, just not in the way anyone had expected. When Robert Thorne arrived for his 4-month check-in, Elara's stomach churned with anxiety. He'd come expecting to see show jumping training. Instead, she'd have to convince him that what the Duke was doing was equally valuable. She met him in the main pasture with a carefully prepared presentation. "Mr. Thorne, I know you were expecting to see jumping, but I've discovered something much more important about the Duke." Robert's expression was skeptical, but curious. "Go on." Elara demonstrated the Duke's cattle work, her responsiveness to visual commands, her problem-solving abilities. She showed videos of the mare navigating complex trail courses, stepping over obstacles with precise care, responding to hand signals from over 100 feet away. "What you're seeing," Elara explained, "isn't a failed show jumper. It's a horse with extraordinary cognitive abilities that were being wasted in an environment that couldn't accommodate her needs. She's not broken or untrainable. She just needed someone to communicate in her language." Robert watched in silence, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. When the demonstration ended, he surprised Elara by climbing into the pasture himself. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the Duke. Elara hesitated, then nodded. "Just remember, stay in her line of sight, use clear visual signals, and give her time to process." Robert approached the Duke with more patience than Elara had expected. He used the hand signals she'd taught him, moving slowly, deliberately. The mare watched him carefully, but didn't panic, responding to his visual cues with the same precision she showed with Elara. After 15 minutes, Robert returned to the fence, his expression unreadable. "Miss Vance," he said finally, "when I designed this trial, I expected one of 2 outcomes. Either you'd successfully retrain the Duke for show jumping, proving my facilities failed her, or you'd confirm that she was genuinely untrainable, justifying our decision to dispose of her." Elara's blood ran cold. "Dispose of her?" "We were planning to sell her at auction when she returned," Robert admitted, "probably to a kill buyer. We couldn't justify the expense of keeping an expensive pasture pet." The words hit Elara like a physical blow. They hadn't just been planning to take the Duke back, they'd been planning to send her to slaughter. "But you've presented a third option," Robert continued, "one I didn't anticipate. You haven't made her normal. You've redefined what she's capable of and proven there's genuine value in alternative training approaches for horses with disabilities. The academic and training community would be extremely interested in your methodology. The University of Colorado has already expressed interest in collaborating on research after reading my preliminary reports. There's potential for grants, published studies, training programs for other horses with special needs." Hope flared in Elara's chest, but she forced herself to stay cautious. "And the Duke?" Robert was quiet for a long moment. "The original contract gives us the option to repurchase her if training was successful, but I'm prepared to offer an alternative. We officially transfer ownership to you free of charge. In exchange, you continue documenting her training and allow us to study and share your methods. You'd be credited as the primary researcher, and any revenue from training programs or publications would be split 60-40 in your favor. You're giving her to me? Elara couldn't quite process what she was hearing. I'm acknowledging that you've proven something important. That traditional training isn't the only path to success, and that horses deemed worthless by conventional standards can thrive with the right approach. Keeping the Duke would make me a hypocrite. Letting her stay here with you makes me part of something potentially revolutionary. Elara looked at the Duke, who was grazing peacefully, occasionally glancing up to check that her person was still visible. The mare, who'd been hours from a slaughter auction 6 months ago, now represented hope, not just for herself, but for every horse and every human who had been told they were broken because they experienced the world differently. There's one condition, Robert added. You have to finish high school and agree to co-lead a training seminar at my facility next summer. I want my staff to learn from their mistakes. Done, Elara said immediately, hardly believing this was real. As Robert prepared to leave, Diana, who had remained mostly silent during the whole exchange, spoke up for the first time. Mr. Thorne, are you certain about this? The horse is still worth... Robert interrupted. The horse is worth exactly what she means to someone who understands her, and that value is incalculable. After they left, Elara stood in the pasture with the Duke, processing everything that had just happened. Arthur and Genevieve came out to join her, Lucas running ahead with excitement. So, she's really ours. Forever? Lucas signed enthusiastically. Forever, Elara confirmed, her voice breaking with emotion. Arthur pulled his daughter into a hug. I'm proud of you, sweetheart, not just for training the Duke, but for having the courage to redefine success when everyone expected you to follow their rules. That evening, as the Colorado sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Elara sat in the pasture with the Duke's massive head resting in her lap. The mare's eyes were half closed with contentment, completely relaxed in a way that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. We did it, girl, Elara whispered, stroking the white blaze down the Duke's face. We proved that different doesn't mean less, that disability doesn't mean inability, that the wrong place can become exactly the right home when someone finally understands you. The Duke's eye opened, and though she couldn't hear Elara's words, something in the mare's expression suggested she understood. Anyway, they'd both been called difficult, stubborn, broken. They'd both been judged by standards that didn't apply to them, but together they'd written a new definition of success, one that made room for horses who worked cattle instead of clearing jumps, for girls who read lips instead of hearing words, for lives that looked different but were no less valuable. The show jumper nobody understood had found her voice, and the girl who struggled to hear had learned to communicate in ways that transcended sound. Sometimes the best deliveries are the ones that arrive at the wrong address, because maybe, just maybe, the universe knows exactly where we need to be, even when we think we're lost.